This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/rubyrogues.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Brian Hogan.
Hello.
Dave Kimura.
Hey everybody.
Eric Berry.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Greg Kushto. Greg, do you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Do you want to give us just a brief introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Greg Kushto, the Vice President of Sales Engineering and Security at Force3, and I've been specialized on information security for about 25 years, back when we really started caring about security in the computer world.
Yeah, that's cool. So we have you on today to talk about thwarting insider threats. Do you want to kind of give us just a brief overview of what that entails?
Sure. So insider threats really can be looked at two ways. The traditional insider threat that everyone thinks of is a rogue employee who's dissatisfied or has been approached or bribed by somebody else and kind of sneaking around cubes and stealing information. And that's certainly something that does exist and something we need to be careful of. But also, insider threat can reference a couple different situations beyond that people usually don't think of. And those include things such as just not even malicious, but unaware intent. For example, leaving a door open is just as critical in physical security as leaving, code unfinished or websites unsecure in information security. It could also be something as simple as seeding. There's a lot of effective attacks that take advantage of people who want to do the right thing or trying to do the right thing. For example, clicking on links they may get from outside who they think is reliable resource, to anything from picking up free, quote unquote, free USB drives that are sitting in a parking lot or even given out by unscrupulous people at conferences. So insider threat is really any attack or any threat that comes from inside an organization that is totally unexpected.
Gotcha. Now, we're coders, so is this our job or is this somebody else's job?
Well, honestly, it's really everyone's job. I like to look at it as a team approach. There's different people across the team in the IT organization. At the end of the day, users need to use an application to get their job done. The application requires somebody to create it. It requires the software to sustain the application, and then the hardware to run that software, to run that application, and then the networking piece to tie all of it together with everyone inside the company and everyone across the world. So it's really everyone's part to be a part of information security, and especially insider threat.
So you've been doing this for a long time. How did you get started?
So I actually got started a very long time ago. Helpdesk was my first job, helping people log in, use the computer correctly, figure out how to do things in Microsoft Office or even Lotus very, very long time ago. So I started from there, grew more into the server side, figuring out what servers we needed in an organization, started picking up some networking skills, and then honestly ended up with a situation where we had malicious activity in a place I used to work at. And I started investigating it and then turned into my whole career. So it's funny, it's not quite as exciting as The Cuckoo's Egg, which is an amazing book. I really recommend everyone read. Very easy read from a long time ago, from somebody who was a application developer, actually an astronomer who was creating applications to measure and figure out where stars are, and turned into really information security expert from following that same trail. So that's kind of how the same path I went down, although nowhere near as exciting as the book.
Well, I have a lot of students that I work with, and that one of the questions that I routinely get is, how do I get started in this line of work? So, briefly, since you're at a director level right now, what advice would you give people who were looking to sort of break into this particular area of IT?
Yeah, the recommendation I give people when they ask me about how to get into security is really figuring out where they are now. From my point of view, security is something that's almost an advanced level of a IT discipline that already exists. So you can't really just start from nothing and then become a security expert. In order to be a security expert, you really need to understand the ins and outs of a different IT topic, whether it's coding, whether it's networking or infrastructure. So the first thing I would recommend everybody do is figure out what are they doing now? Are they an expert in that? How do they get better at that? And then once you start to get better at that, you can start looking at other disciplines. As I said before, security is really something that covers every gamut of an organization, of an IT infrastructure. So you really need to understand how all of these things work together to really be able to figure out how to secure them. Once you've done that, that's critical to really take it to the next level of security. But just from a basic user level of security, it's really around educating yourself around what your information is, why you want to protect it, and then why you would do that on behalf of you or company. Now, the funny thing is, I've given security talks for a long time, and I used to spend 10 to 15 minutes trying to just scare everyone about security and why it was really important and why people should pay attention. And sadly, these days, I don't have to do that. We're all aware of why security is so important. I'm sure, I never need to pay for credit monitoring because like clockwork, every 12 to 24 months, I get a notice from somebody that they were hacked and I get free credit monitoring. And, people get their email locked down. They see things happen at work. It's all over the news. So that side of security was really around educating yourself around why it's important, what you can do to protect what your own environment, your own personal information, and then applying that to what you do, whether you're coding or building infrastructure or connecting networks.
Yeah, and so as far as just insider threats go, there's a lot of different reasons or why something like that can happen. And the first thing that popped into my mind was making a statement. So sometimes you have a employee who really likes what they do for the company or a business, and they come across something that they are like, we have to expose this. So the first person that comes to my mind is Edward Snowden. So essentially, he was a whistleblower, but that's also like an insider threat from a contractor. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, I know insider threats to some degree are bad, but then on the other hand, he's kind of doing justice by letting the people know that, hey, this company's or this government's doing this.
Sure. So there's really two points there. One's the political point. To be honest, that's really a touchy subject that could go in a matter of different ways. And I would say that, people really need to use their own judgment and figure out what's important, what's not important. Things we don't know is, did he try to talk to anybody else about what he thought was going on? Did he try to escalate that issue? And what steps did he take? Do we know whether he's working with other people or whether he just saw this and kind of threw it out there and figured it out? So without any more of that information, that part of it's definitely hard to address. The second piece of it is really just insider threat. And to me, this is really where, this is kind of, especially these days, the stereotypical insider threat incident, right? Where you have a lone wolf who's motivated by something, who's able to bypass security controls and then really be able to do whatever they want with that personal information. To me, it's a classic example of having, no checks and balances inside your environment. As an administrator, without other people needing to give him the appropriate access, he basically had root access everywhere. He's able to do whatever he wants. And nobody was really looking at the logs until months later, and they looked at the logs and it was all over the place. And to me, that's why insider threat is critical. Whether you believe in what he was doing or not, we can all agree that probably wasn't the best way to handle that situation.
So how do you proactively then prevent something like this? all the politics aside, let's just say some person in the company, gaining access to stuff that they either shouldn't have access to, or making sure if they do have access that access is only being used for the things you want it to.
Yeah, it really comes down to three different things. The first is checks and balances, right? It's needing the approval of other people to create an operation. So, if you're familiar with cryptographic phrases, it's M of N, right? You want a situation where if somebody needs to do an action, you need more than just that person to be able to approve it. There's a lot of different ways you can code that in software. There's a lot of different products that you can add on inside of your environment to add that capability. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that there's multiple people involved with getting access or creating access or figuring out who has access to what. The second piece of that would be auditing and accountability. We spend a lot of time, computers and applications spend a lot of time creating a lot of logs that nobody really does anything with. So making sure that you've got some kind of robust, event methodology where you are taking a sample of logs or reviewing logs or creating a methodology to figure out which logs are critical versus not, and really looking through them and being proactive, very important. And then finally, it's really about looking at how you set up a system, not just from user intent, but really thinking about what are all the possible outcomes that can happen, and how do I protect against them? And I mean this for all of us in every aspect of IT. The vast majority of the time, we are creating something, an environment, an application, a network, whatever it is, and we're thinking of in the mindset of, I'm a person who's going to use this. How am I going to use this? Very rarely do we step back and say, okay, well, here's crazy things that I'm not expecting. How can I make sure that if something bad happens or if something weird happens, I know how to exit gracefully, or I know how to ignore that error, or I know how to alert somebody that something's wrong. So creating an environment like that, where you've got both positive and negative affects, you're making sure people are doing the right thing, and you've constructed the environment in such a way that if the right thing is not occurring, either depending on your level of risk, it's stopped immediately or somebody's alerted immediately, or whatever action you want to take is really important. So being able to tie all of those together is really the best way to stop insider threat. It's really about sitting down and thinking about not only what are good people, quote unquote good people, good users going to do, but what could bad or honestly incompetent users do, and how do I correct their bad input?
Yeah, and from my DevOps days, whenever I would configure or provision a server, I wouldn't run the web service or the application server as the root user. I would always create a separate user that had much more restricted privileges. I guess the principle of least privilege. And so that's how I would set up a environment. And I guess that extends out to the real world with people, not giving everyone full access to everything, but locking it down to where developers of a product, they don't have access to the production server to tinker around or mess with things, unless if it's like a supervised privilege, something like that. Locked door keeps a honest man honest.
Exactly. And one of my first bosses in one of my first security jobs used to say that temporary solutions make permanent problems, right? And that's the exact same thing. If you're just taking a shortcut to figure out how to get something to work, or spinning something from dev to prod and, oh, don't worry, I'll go back and fix this. We all know that the majority of time you never go back and fix that. And it's just, right, we're all working. We've all got a lot of things to do, and it's working, and you forget about it. You're on to the next problem. That's how humans work. So making sure that you've got a methodology to do things correctly, and you're checking to make sure that methodology is followed repeatedly, is really the only way to be sure that you're doing things correctly and you're not leaving holes like this. I don't have an exact stat, but I think Gartner released something where human error was, I forget exactly what it was, 70-80% of computer issues were caused by human error. And I think that's very true. And again, the majority of the time, the errors that happen, even if it's a malicious person using those errors weren't malicious. It was just somebody with not enough time to do the right thing, or somebody trying to get a project done on time, or trying to cut corners to save a couple of bucks here or there. So really being able to sit down and not give yourself that easy crutch of a temporary solution eliminates a ton of security issues.
Right, you're making a really important distinction here, because a lot of people think about insider threats as people trying to be malicious, but you're identifying situations where, like, accidents can happen, and how do you defend yourself from accidents, right?
That's correct. Insider threat covers that full gamut of not only the Edward Snowdens, but people who accidentally kick over the power cord and power down the whole server infrastructure for the company, right? So no matter, at the end of the day, the intent, while it's interesting to know and just figure out how to protect against it and make sure that doesn't happen again, at the end of the day, the threat is the threat. Something bad has happened. If my server infrastructure goes down and my boss comes in and I say, "Oh, sorry, one of my people accidentally powered it down," it's not like, "Oh, don't worry about it. That's fine." It's like, what? How could this possibly happen? So the goal to insider threat and really figuring out how to protect against it holistically is considering not just the malicious people, but the people who don't know what they're doing or who accidentally do the wrong thing.
So when we hear about these junior developers who accidentally delete the production database, you're really saying that that's not just that's a failure at the security level, not just a failure at the individual team level, right?
I love your assumption that it's junior developers that make that mistake.
Yeah, but that's the ones we see, right? We see those a lot. I've seen at least 3 of those this year alone, in this last 12 months or so. So I just lost my job because I deleted a production database. And my first thinking is, well, who gave you the keys to be able to do that, right?
Yes,
I agree.
Great example of why everyone is involved. Yes, junior people shouldn't delete production things, but on the other hand, they're junior people. Why do junior people have the ability to log into production base and then delete it? It's mind-boggling. And replacing that person with a different junior developer may temporarily fix the issue. Again, temporary solution. You've replaced somebody who did something accidentally, but permanently, you've not solved that problem. You're still relying on people fresh out of school or fresh out of learning how to code to do the right thing. It's not that they didn't want to do the right thing. I'm sure the vast majority of the time, as soon as they delete it, they probably sat there and tried not to cry, right? So it's really about figuring out, how do we help people help themselves? And if we can cover, trust me, if we can cover getting in front of people, making accidents and doing things they shouldn't be able to, honestly, the malicious people, all of that same work is really going to stop all the malicious activity as well.
Yeah. In our company, I think that we call insider threat prevention red tape. And, it's there for a reason.
Yeah, agreed. It's one of those things, and especially security. I'm a eat your vegetables guy. It's not always a fun thing to do. And security used to be about what I used to call the no police, right? They came to us and we'd pull out our badge and say, "Nope, you can't do that." Well, that time is past. It's over. Everyone knows how computers work. The business is involved on how computers work, how they want their applications to run. And we've proven time and time again that when you tell people no, they say, "Okay, well, I'm going to do this anyway," and figure out how to go around you. They don't say, "Oh, you got me, I won't do it." So really, security is about trying to change that. I mean, there's always going to be an element of red tape and saying no, but I like to call it no but. No, you can't do that, but here's a way that we can do that. No, you can't do this, but here's a different solution that'll give you what you want while maintaining some semblance of security. So it's really important for security professionals, especially when working with coders who, I'll be honest, most security professionals do not usually come from a coding background. So you guys can really do whatever you want. I mean, we're relying on you a lot of the time to follow correct security procedures and involve us when you need to. It's really about helping you all figure out, basically we're your security friends. Like, you want to come to us, we want to sit down and figure out how to do something, not just tell you, "No, you can't do this, no, you can't do that." Because that's never effective.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead. My question is there then an easy sort of list of things or a methodology for finding these kinds of threats so that we can solve them before they become an issue? Or is this just something you kind of learn the hard way over and over?
Well, I think the methodology really goes back to this. This is nothing special. It's really just taking the same security mindset that we've had basically forever and actually doing it, right? There's no, I tell people all the time, I mean, the amount of security tools and appliances and applications out there is insane. I mean, you look at something like Metasploit. I mean, I remember, when we were writing scripts trying to figure out how to do fuzzing, and now you just log into Metasploit and you tell it to own a box and you go get a coffee and come back and there you are. So, even though security keeps changing and the tools and the applications and coding languages and everything are different, the methodology is still the same. And the methodology is CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability. If you design your environment, your network, your applications, your databases with those three things in mind, how do I make sure that only the correct people have access to see whatever the data I want them to see? How do I make sure that only the correct people are able to change that data? So people who can't change the data, the system, the application, unless they're allowed to. And how do I make sure that everyone who needs to use this application is able to do that, even with these security controls in place? If you follow those three things, you're going to always come out with a very secure environment, application, system, whatever you want to call it.
So 10 years ago, we were concerned about people coming in with USB disks and writable CDs and pulling data out of an organization. Now the average tech worker comes in with maybe with a backpack, with a smartphone in it and a smartwatch and some other wearable technology and a tablet maybe in their in that bag. How has that changed how you look at threats from the inside?
Yeah, I think it's reinforced the necessity of having the appropriate controls in place, because there was a lot of cheating, for lack of a better word, before, right? You made sure that, if somebody walked in and they weren't carrying any of those equipment or they don't have a laptop, well, then what are they going to do? You know that they can't magically transfer all of that data. If they're going to burn a CD of, 500 megs, you'll catch them in the 30 minutes it takes to burn a CD, right? That was kind of like a free level of security that people overly relied on. And you're right, the amount of information my phone is 200 plus gigs of storage on my phone, which is mind blowing. I mean, there's almost nothing in the world that you couldn't fit into 200 gigs, at least a good portion or the critical portion of whatever sister data set you're looking for. So again, it really goes back to being able to enforce those controls appropriately. And that comes down to things like, administrator root access on a laptop or on an endpoint. Just because somebody's allowed to log in and figure out, and manipulate data and create an application doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to allow them to transfer that data out of that environment. It doesn't necessarily mean that even though you're allowed to copy data down to your personal device, that your personal device isn't allowed to do something else with that data. So it's really about figuring out how people are using the data and locking down those other ways. And locking down and figuring out how people are using it are critical. Again, going back to the no police, if you just tell people, well, you can't use your phone to look at stuff, people are going to figure out how to use their phone to look at something. So you want to say, well, what are you using your phone for? Oh, it's because you are doing, overnight stuff on the weekend where you're testing stuff in dev and you want to make sure it's working correctly. Well, let's figure out how we can secure your phone. Maybe we give you a special, maybe the company gives you a phone that only has access to this. Maybe we can spin up a VM on your phone where you can get the appropriate access you need to. And when you're enabling people to do the job the way they want to do the job, obviously within reason, you're going to lower the amount of security involved with those types of threats. Because most people aren't trying to do something malicious. They're just trying to do their jobs the easiest way possible. And we need to figure out how to securely enable them to do that.
Well, I think not only all of that, but then you also have the third-party companies coming in with the Apple laptops or the Apple OS and the passwordless root that was exposed a few months ago. So just keeping your laptop quote secure with the screen locked or it encrypted almost just isn't good enough anymore because you're relying on Apple to have a solid operating system without any vulnerabilities. And then the choice of hardware that they use with the Intel the Meltdown, and all that junk going on. Now it's like, all your infrastructure and your computers that people are using have this potential leak. So, I mean, it's coming from the inside too, which is crazy.
That's exactly correct. And that's why it's so important to make sure you're designing multiple strategies or multiple areas within your security strategy inside your environment. That you just can't rely on one specific aspect of security. For example, as you mentioned, making sure the laptop's secure. Okay, well, that's great. But when a vendor has an issue that nobody had any idea that Intel was going to have a chip problem, there's going to be vulnerable to everything across the world, right? You can't secure that. The way you can't just say, oh, that's never going to happen. You've got to have multiple layers of security within any environment. So in that example, if you need to make sure your internal environment is tracking the data. Where does the data sit? Who's using it? Is it alerting somebody if that's being used incorrectly or copied to a laptop where it shouldn't be? That laptop, do you have encryption on that laptop? So even if somebody's able to get into it, is it an encrypted file that you need an application to unencrypt to open that code to start looking at it? So again, it's really about multiple layers of security. The defense in depth approach is the only thing that we know that works all the time, and that's multiple layers of security across multiple pieces of your environment, keeping that CIA confidentiality, integrity, availability in mind.
Interview Cake makes coding interviews a piece of cake. Here's the problem with most coding interview practice. You work on a problem, bang your head against the wall, give up, and look up the answer. And then you're like, what? How do you even come up with something like that? That's why Interview Cake teaches you step-by-step how to come up with clever algorithms. They break it down into a simple set of patterns that can be applied to any problem. To learn more, check out interviewcake.com/RubyRogues. Ruby Rogues listeners get 20% off Interview Cake's full online coding interview prep course. To sign up today, go to interviewcake.com/RubyRogues.
So one thing that I'm wondering about is, we're talking about all these preventative measures, right? And you're talking about having an audit trail and things like that. But what do you do if you actually have a breach? I mean, what's the right answer there? Do you have some kind of procedure in place for that kind of a thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So honestly, the answer to that goes to risk. And you really need to figure out what is inside your environment and how you want to protect it. And honestly, what's inside your environment is a question that most people cannot answer. I mean, the vast majority of people cannot answer. So that's the first step. What's inside my environment? How does all this stuff work together? It's amazing. In IT, we're so good at kind of getting everything to work and having everything designed to work together, to work appropriately, that a lot of times people just kind of stand things up and it works and they're like, oh, it works. And you kind of go on to the next thing without sitting down to figure out, why is this working? Oh, it's because on the firewall, I was troubleshooting and I allowed any, and hey, now I don't have any issues anymore. Well, that's great. You've solved you've got a solution for the problem. But the issue is you may as well take that firewall down because it's not doing anything anymore if you're allowing any. So figuring out what's inside your environment and then how badly you want to protect it is really the way around that. And to me, that second piece, a lot of people have made progress on figuring out what's their environment, figuring out what needs to be secured or not. But there's still a lot of work to be done around how do we want to secure it, or what's the risk level of this. If you're talking information in your company that is critical, that if your competitor found out this information, you would go out of business, obviously that's when you want to enable your environment to hopefully proactively protect that information. What I mean by that is really around automation. In the security space, you may have something where if you see a certain type of alert involving a certain system, then you can have your firewall just deny traffic to that part of your system. Or, with a VLAN or separate network inside your data center, if it's that critical, you can turn off access to that, where you need to go in basically plug in a cable and re-enable that. Now, obviously, the vast majority of data inside an information is not that critical where you want it to shut down closed where nobody can access it. But being able to sit down and figure out what data is that critical versus what data is not that critical. If somebody's browsing the internet at lunchtime while they're eating a sandwich and listening to free music, and then all of a sudden, something starts sending spam to their computer, you probably don't need to shut down the whole company to alert against that, right? Maybe you just want to deactivate that account or send a message or, IT help desk person to them and say, hey, obviously we see some spam coming out of this computer. Let's shut it down. So it's really about figuring out what's inside your environment, how badly you want to protect it, and then putting those appropriate controls in place to figure out how to do that. And that's a lot of time where people fail, where they say, well, if there's any security incidents, I'm going to do the highest level of security. And then all you do is you make people angry because it's the guy's, coding at lunch, the entire company shuts down and everybody's mad at him for a week, right? So you want to avoid things like that. You want to take the appropriate action for the appropriate threat.
Yeah, because a lot of times, it's a give and take, because you could do something like that, shut everything down, but is that too drastic of a measure? For example, like with my house, my house is, quote, secure enough because I lock my windows and I lock my doors. I could go a step further and put bars on all my windows, but, that costs money. That's, not aesthetically pleasing. And it becomes too much of a hassle if I want to just crack open a window or something. So I think a lot of it comes down to the risk, the education of the people to make smart decisions and what to look out for. Don't click on this link in the email and a lot of that stuff.
I agree. That's a great analogy. Yeah, the money you make, hopefully, is at a bank, right? Hopefully there's a vault somewhere. There's a lot of security going on. You don't want to hire a guard to stand in front of your house and decide whether you're allowed in or not. You don't want to spend $1 million hollowing out a vault and putting concrete everywhere and metal and the giant vault door that you see in movies. You don't need that level of security for your house unless, of course, you got a whole truckload of diamonds or something awesome in there, right? So it's really about assigning those appropriate security controls really based on the risk. And until companies start doing that effectively, there's always going to be this, basically rush to and collapse from the most recent security incident. Oh no, something bad happened. All right, everybody's doing security all the time for 2 weeks until we get tired of it, or 3 weeks until an executive complains that they can't get email on their iPad or whatever. Going from security incident, relaxing, going back to security incident is only going to give people whiplash and make people slowly start tuning out security. So it's really about figuring out what your risk posture is and then addressing that appropriately is really the only effective way to make sure that happens.
So one other question that I have, one book I read a number of years ago was Ghost in the Wires by Kevin Mitnick. And in a lot of those cases, he was an intruder. He wasn't an insider, but he would come in and, you talked about phishing emails, or they would call in and impersonate one person in the company to gain access to another person in the company who could eventually give them the information they needed to get into the system. How much of that falls under insider threats versus just educating people to not allow access to external people?
So to me, that 100% is the perfect example of insider threat. And Kevin Mitnick proved that the weakest part of any system is the human beings attached to that system. And we're never going to be able to train people to act as if they're security robots. And honestly, even though I'm a security guy and I love security, I don't know if I want to live in a world where everybody acts as 100% efficient security robots. That's just human nature. We're a tribe. We hopefully most of the time work together, notwithstanding politics recently. But figuring out how to take advantage of people being nice and wanting to help, that you're never going to solve that. And beating people and going through user training, I think user training is important for people to be aware of what's going on and how to protect themselves. But again, you cannot 100% rely on people to do the right thing all the time. And again, it has nothing to do with whether they're malicious or not. Somebody is always going to be able to call and sweet talk somebody into doing the wrong thing, even because they think they're helping somebody out. So that's really where it goes back to having those multiple layers of security controls and ensuring that even though somebody is trying to, help somebody out, even though it's malicious activity, there's somebody behind them saying, wait a minute, I know you're trying to let them in because they forgot their badge, but I don't know who they are. And let's sit down and figure out who the right person is. I mean, again, we don't want to eliminate how people act because it's just an impossible task. So you've really got to design your controls around what people are just going to naturally do.
Yep.
And, I think companies can go to some degree to, carve out just the accidental mistakes that people make. For example, like my parents, I know my mom and dad are going to click on any link that comes into their inbox. It doesn't matter who it's from. They're just like, oh, I have a PDF with the bill due. Okay, I'll open that up. So I set up, their accounts on Gmail back when they had the private or the free domain. So they still have their own domain name, but, it's all hosted through Gmail. And Gmail does a fantastic job of filtering out a lot of that spam junk. So, for them, I say, hey, still use caution. But for the most part, if something gets into your inbox, click on it. But use reasonable judgment. But it's something that I don't really have to worry about anymore.
Exactly. And that's how we need to make sure we're designing our environment securely, because people are always going to click on a link. I tell people, I guarantee that I can send an email with an attachment that somebody on your company is going to click on. And people are like, no, we do all this user training. No, they'll know. It's very easy. And it has nothing to do with computers. All it has to do with is the name of the file. And the name of the file is executive salaries. I guarantee if I send a file to any company that says executive salaries, somebody is clicking it, because there's always somebody that's like, I got to know what these people are making. It's human nature. There's going to be one person. And guess what? It's never just one person. And it has nothing to do with security. It has nothing to do with coding. It has nothing to do with cool next level ninja type stuff where you're hacking into systems. It's literally executive salaries. That's it. You're into any system. So you've got to be able to design around relying on people being 100% effective, because we're just not. We're human beings.
Yeah. One other thing that I found that helps mitigate some of this is just having written procedures for a lot of this stuff. And then as much as possible, we're coders, writing a program, writing a script that will, run through the procedures. Because as much as you can, if you can automate or make it at least easy for people to know exactly how something is done, then they tend not to as much deviate. Sometimes they do, but generally I find that people generally won't deviate into these other areas that cause the issues in the first place. And then if there's something that, goes outside of these general procedures for the common stuff, then they can start having the conversations about how they need to get those done.
Yeah, I agree. And the 3 high-level recommendations I give specifically around coding, and again, I am not a coding expert, so these are going to be very, very high level. 1, commenting or clear code, whatever you want to call it. You want to make sure that no matter how you figure out how you're coding something, you get it to work, you've got to go back and either say, here's the magic I employed to make this happen, or rewrite it to make it clear. You've got to be able to make sure that somebody else can look at that code. Second piece, peer review. You've got to have somebody else look at it. Just to, again, all of us, we get locked in a tunnel and you're trying to get stuff done and you figure it out the easiest way to get it done. You've got to make sure somebody else looks at it. And I know we all do that. I'm saying we, like, again, I'm not much of a coder, but I know we all, hey, something works, I'm out of here, versus, something doesn't work, let me reach out for help. Even when things work, sometimes you really want to make sure you're sending it, hey, I got this to work. Does this make sense? Do you think this is the best way to do it? How else could I do that? I think it's critical. And then finally, just expect the unexpected. We all sit down, again, figure out how to design a system to work for the right person who's supposed to use that system. But there's going to be people who aren't supposed to use that system, and there's going to be people who are supposed to use it but honestly don't know how to use it. You've got to make sure you're coding around that and figuring out, what do I do if I get bad input? How do I make sure that nothing bad happens? So that's really the 3 high-level pieces I look at for secure coding. If you're doing those things, everything else takes care of itself.
Yeah, and don't copy and paste anywhere except from Stack Overflow. If it's not on Stack
exactly.
Overflow to copy and paste, then don't use the code.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
So one other thing that I'm wondering about here is, it seems like the landscape of this is changing every day, and that, what are kind of good general practices today, the general principles hold, but the practices are going to change, right? You mentioned USB drives and CD, blank CDs, and now it's, I'm just going to copy it over to my phone over Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. So how do you stay on top of what these threats are?
So it's really a couple different ways. One is just making sure you're staying in touch with what's going on in the world. And I don't know a better way to frame that, but all of the constant keeping up to date we do with different technologies, coding languages, etc. You've got to do the same thing with security. You need to make sure you're, I can give a couple examples of podcasts or websites that you want to check, but you just got to make sure you're kind of staying abreast of what's going on out there and what the newest threats are. Because at the end of the day, the biggest problem around security is that it's not a concrete, it's not a discrete problem that we can solve. It's another person. At the end of the day, when you're looking at security issues and malicious people, it's another human being who is using everything that makes us awesome as humans, which is quickly problem solving our way to a solution. And you've got to solve that. And you're right, that's going to change day by day, hour by hour, constantly as you get new people, new technologies, new thoughts, new ways to hack into systems. So you just need to make sure that not only you're doing the basics, but you're really just staying abreast of all the different security news, topics, situations that are going on out there, and then reviewing what you're doing and making sure you're incorporating that information. Because just like IT security is constantly changing. And if you're not moving, you're dead.
Dave, it sounded like you were going to bring something in.
Oh, I was going to say about, if you are doing the coding and stuff, do your due diligence too and run a static code analysis tool for whatever language that you have. For Ruby, you can run breakmen on your application to check to see if you are exposing threats. So, and if you leave those threats in there, then you are basically your own insider threat.
Yeah. And again, going back to peer review, phoning a friend and offering $20 a beer, so anything. Hey, I bet you, a six-pack, you can't get this, you can't break my code. People will get motivated and they'll figure out the best way to break your code. So again, going back to peer review and having other people look at it and using the tools out there to automate some of that code review and response is a great thing to make sure that you're incorporating.
So a funny story of an insider threat, not in my current employer, but something that I've seen in the past is, some developer guys were trying to see how far their production system, how much traffic can it sustain? Do they need to add more servers? Do they have too many based on their, ideal targets that they're wanting to hit? So they started running some JMeter tests and some load balancer tests to see, how much traffic it could sustain, and it kept taking down the site. So even though it was for good intentions and, maybe the wrong environment that they were testing on, but they kept taking down their own production site. So I think using good decisions on having a pre-production environment that's very similar to your production environment to drill down and do all of those kind of tests, can also help prevent insider accidental threats.
Oh, I totally agree. And I honestly think, to me, that's the next frontier in security, is that almost like we were talking about with CDs and USB versus phone. I mean, containerization and cloud is the next step in IT and IT security, because, if you're looking at your own environment, you've still got some physical control you're relying on to make sure you're securing that environment. When literally everything's on AWS or wherever it is out in the cloud, you have no control over that whatsoever. That's when you need to, that's really the next focus for computer security. Because right now, what we do most of the time is we replicate what we've done. We set up the same physical environment and we virtually recreate that inside a container. And to me, that's the next frontier, is now that we don't have physical control, now that we don't have to replicate these physical boxes, which, by the way, were only different boxes because the computer wasn't big enough to do all the stuff itself. How do we sit down and secure that? And I think that is where a lot of cool new concepts, and not only information infrastructure security, but in code analysis security, are really going to come the next couple of years.
I was actually going to ask about that. You mentioned AWS, but a lot of folks actually do Docker and things like that.
Yep.
And, and so they essentially replicate the same server across their entire infrastructure. And so, you do audits, you figure out that there's another way in, and then, hopefully you're using some tool like Chef or something to manage updates to all of those systems. But does that make us more vulnerable in a lot of ways? I mean, when it's a virtual machine in a cloud, like an AWS or something, there really isn't a physical location for it. They'd have to hack the hypervisor of the machine that it's running on and then hack your VM. But at the same time, that is a vector of attack. Yeah, I'm just wondering, you wind up replicating your mistakes, on a level that we didn't really have the option of replicating them on 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and it's scripting, right? If you write a great script, it solves a lot of your challenges, and if you make a mistake in a script that you didn't foresee, you've got a lot of issues on your hands probably. So it's a good point. It comes down to ensuring that not only is that container secure as you can possibly make it, so that when you replicate it, you're replicating something without errors, but taking into account the fact that you're never going to be able to be 100% sure, just because you're relying on other people, other software, other companies that are going to have errors. So having that second process in place where you're able to update all of these different containers, make sure whatever security issue is happening, you can go and fix quickly throughout your environment, is going to be critical, because you're going to have a situation where, this vendor released this vulnerability, and now literally everything in my environment ran on that, and I've got to do something about it. So proactively making sure you can address issues like that are very critical. And again, that auditing and accountability that goes into creating that first container or VM or whatever you want to use, making sure that's secure as possible, so that when you do replicate it, you're not using a bad lock that any key will open and putting it throughout your entire building. So that's critical.
So I haven't been too active in this conversation because when it comes to security and everything, my eyes tend to glaze. No offense, my eyes tend to glaze over a little bit because I relate it somewhat to the DevOps as well, where it's something that I probably should be aware of, but I haven't really been aware of it because I know others are more worried about it than I am. For those people like me who are maybe probably not the best example of how you should be, are there cheat sheets or checklists or something that we can go by that would allow us to say, okay, I might not need to keep this at top of mind personally, or maybe that's a bad way of saying it. I don't keep this at top of mind personally, but I can follow a list to make sure that there are things that I'm doing correctly to prevent these type of catastrophes.
Yeah, there's a couple different things you could do. First of all, I'm familiar with SANS secure coding, where they'll give you a checklist of basically, when you're coding, take these precepts in mind to make sure you're coding a system securely. There's a lot of those out of there. I'm familiar with SANS, but basically get one of those checklists, put it next to your desk, your office, wherever you're sitting, and just make sure you're looking at that every day. Hey, let me just look at this, make sure I'm thinking the right way, and making sure I'm keeping this as secure as possible. It's a very easy read. Even I understood it, again, is not a crazy in-depth coder. So that's something I definitely recommend. And then something else from SANS. I don't work with SANS. I'm not affiliated with SANS, but they do a lot of really great things for the security community. They have a daily podcast from their Internet Storm Center. So basically their SOC that looks out for security events and keeps people aware. They have a daily 5-minute podcast. It's literally 5 minutes. If you listen to that every day, you will be just as informed as almost every security professional out there, because it's literally, again, it's 5 minutes. It's, hey, here's 2 or 3 updates. So not only are you aware of the different security issues that are occurring out in the wild, but we'll also get you thinking about, hey, how do I make sure whatever I'm working on doesn't hit those security issues? Because it'll say things, Microsoft Patch Tuesday is coming out, and here's some of the code flaws that they're fixing. And you can say, oh, I got to make sure I'm taking that into account. The new version of Adobe is coming out, and here's what they're fixing from the latest PDF exploits. And you can say, okay, that's great. Let me make sure I'm doing that. And again, it's 5 minutes. Even if you're commuting from your bedroom to your home office, or walking the dog or getting the mail, you can always make 5 minutes to listen to something, and you'll be incredibly up to date there. So those are really two great ways to make sure you're keeping security in mind, but you're not going overboard, because overboard never works. It's like diets on January 1st. 3 weeks later, most people aren't on a diet anymore.
One other resource that I really like is OWASP, and they have some tools that you can run against your apps too that will check for common exploits.
Yep, great point.
So one other question that I have related to this is, let's say that we get everything nailed down to where, we've updated all of our procedures. We know how we're looking for the insider threats and preventing some of these issues from cropping up, whether it's the accidental dropping of a database or the openings that we can create for external malicious people to come in and steal data or cause trouble. How often do we need to revisit this stuff?
Yeah, periodically. And again, this goes back to a risk-based decision. It's definitely periodically. If you are coding an application that gives public data to anybody that looks for it, maybe you review your procedures once a year, because it's publicly available data. There's not really a lot of malicious intent that can come from this, and maybe your biggest worries are DDoS or something like that. So maybe once a year is really all you need, but you need to make sure you are reviewing it that once a year, versus something, again, company critical. If you're selling an application and the code for that application is what makes your entire company run and everybody get paid and keeps you beating out competitors for whatever applications they're designing, maybe you want to look at that once a month or every 2 weeks. So you want to figure out what that periodic nature is based on that risk, and then you want to make sure you do it religiously. It's the eat your vegetables approach. It's the only way to do it. Nobody wants to sit down and review security every 2 weeks, but hey, if this gets hacked and we lose our source code, then we're all finding other jobs. It's usually pretty motivating. So you just want to make sure that you're doing the right thing, and that you've got accountability to keep doing the right thing into the future.
Greg, your job is, taking care of this kind of thing. What does a day in the life of Greg look like, as far as, for us, it's going to kind of be something that we bring up periodically and then handle as issues come up. But for you, where you're thinking about this day in and day out, what do you spend most of your time doing?
Honestly, I spend most of my time sitting in meetings. I think we probably all do that, right?
You're making me want to cry.
So I would say, for any good security professional, you really want to divide your time 50-50. Half of the time, you need to be able to have free to combat threats that are going to happen. You need to make sure that you have the time to figure out what threats are out there. Are we protected against them? If something's bad happening, how do I fix it? Who do I need to get involved to fix it? So you just have to. Again, going back to human beings on the other side of all of these bad things happening, whether it's malicious or not, you've got to figure out how you can stay in front of that. And then the second half, the other 50% of that time, is really making sure that you've got the appropriate controls in place and that you're auditing them in a repeatable fashion. So we've designed a system. We've given out this level of user access. When's the last time somebody has reviewed the user access? Do we make sure that when people start or leave the company, is HR notifying the appropriate person to make sure they have the appropriate rights? Hey, we're transitioning from internal to AWS or to some type of container. How do we make sure that's secure? So really, half the time you're going to be facing threats, you're going to be fighting fires, you're going to be making sure that you're able to address any security issues that come up, or security issues that come up from other vendors. And then the other half of the time is really sitting down and basically doing internal auditing, not the really boring auditing of, oh, let me check this log to that, but high level. Hey, do we have a procedure for this? When's the last time somebody looked at it? Is that still valid? And how do I make sure I can update this to something that everybody's going to do? And also a lot of meetings.
I hate meetings. Sorry.
Me too. I sit in them a lot, and it's always fun.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get some picks in.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Brian, do you want to start us off with picks? Well, maybe.
Sure, absolutely. My first pick is this pretty cool, I guess you could call it a kid's toy if you want, but I'm having a little bit of fun as an adult with it. It's called Bloxels. It's a build your own video game kit. And it gives you this physical board with these little cubes, these little pixel cubes, and you can basically fill the board and basically use the board to make pixel art, and then use your tablet to take a picture of it, and it uses it to build the game board or the character sprites and things like that. So it's kind of fun because you instead of using like a pixel art tool to make your characters and make your background tiles, you can just use this physical board to lay things out, and then import it into the game software. And it's a little fun to make. It's got a few little weird edge cases with it, but all in all, it's something you can pick up on Amazon for $34. So it's definitely worth playing with if you have kids, or if you just kind of like these kind of educational nerd things like me.
Dude, I'm so getting that. That's awesome.
I think I saw him at CES.
The other pick I have is actually some piece of open source software that I wrote. It's called S3 Server, and I needed some software. I actually needed something to share some files from an S3 bucket, some music files with someone who needed to pick them up for me. And I didn't want to make it world writable, nor did I want to, to give people credentials to this. So I wrote some software that just serves an S3 bucket and puts Google Auth in front of it. And I since DigitalOcean released their Spaces product, I actually just pushed a patch out there to use the same thing with Spaces. It's called S3 Server, and you can find it on GitHub, and I'll have the link in the show notes for it.
Awesome. Dave, what are your picks?
All right, I have two picks. One is Oxbeam LED headlights. So I don't have great vision, and I can't see really good at night when I'm driving. So I got these LED headlights, which are just a plug-and-play replacement, and they are so much brighter. And after fine-tuning and making sure I'm not blinding oncoming drivers, the visibility on the road is so much better. So I highly recommend them. And they have a much better light than your standard halogen bulbs and stuff. So they're really awesome. And then the second pick that I have is kind of a novelty thing. It's Natifier. It's a NPM package, which allows you to, it gives you a command line interface tool that you can just point to a URL, and it'll package up a Electron app of, I think it also bundles Chromium, and it just makes it a, quote, native application. So it hides the browser bar, the developer tools, and all that stuff. So it looks like you have a actual native app. And I think that it could be what Mattermost uses for their desktop apps.
Nice. Eric, what are your picks?
I've got a couple of picks. The first one is actually the company that I went to work with. The company's name is called Gitcoin. The website is gitcoin.co. And the whole premise behind it is to create an incentivized bounty system to allow ongoing development or support for your open source projects. So I've been rebuilding CodeSponsor in Python, and It's 100% open source. And as I'm doing it, I'm asking for help through these bounties, and I'm actually getting people to help. They get paid in Ethereum, which is pretty cool. And then they turn around and they submit PRs and help me build it. But it's kind of neat to see that side grow. The other thing that I've been using quite a bit, and I think it's super handy for anybody who is either learning a new language or framework, or is just essentially needing to tap in. If you're Googling a lot, if you are checking Stack Overflow a lot, there's an app called Code Pilot, and I think the website is codepilot.ai. But essentially, what it is, it is a machine learning based search engine that will search all of your local Git repositories on your computer. It'll search GitHub and it'll search Stack Overflow. But what I found out is that when you do a search on GitHub for, let's say you're looking for a phrase, something that, for example, I'm looking for like celery result backend, which is a Python configuration. I want to see an example of somebody using it. Well, I search on GitHub for that and it returns back, 5,000 results. But what I found out after talking to the creator is that 99% of those results are basically copied code from other examples. So in reality, there's actually only 94 unique results on GitHub for that string, which I found fascinating. But they use this business logic, or not business logic, this machine learning to really hammer down and give you only true unique results. So yeah, I think the app is absolutely fantastic. I'm using it every day.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in with a couple of picks. One is if you've been listening to this episode, I probably sound a little bit different from what I normally sound like, and that's because I'm in Atlanta right now for the NG Atlanta conference. It's an Angular conference, and so real quick, just to fill you all in on equipment that I'm using here, I have my Apple AirPods in my ears, and they seem to be working all right. You just hook them up through Bluetooth on your MacBook Pro. It's nice on your iOS devices because you just put your AirPods in the case and then open it up and hold it near an iOS device and it'll pair with it. It was actually kind of funny because I was sitting next to my wife's best friend. We wound up on the same flight flying back here because she lives in Charlotte and my connecting flight was in Charlotte. And so I pulled out my AirPods to pair them with my phone because I'd had them paired with my iPad. And they came up on her phone and said, "These are not your AirPods," which I thought was kind of funny. But anyway, I'm really liking them for that. And then as far as the microphone goes, I'm using the ATR 2100. And I just have it plugged in via USB onto this computer. And I'm just recording this using Ecamm call recorder on Skype. So anyway, kind of a nice setup there. Another thing that I'm going to pick as far as travel goes is when I booked this hotel room and my flight. I typically fly Delta just because I have Sky Miles, all that stuff. But I was looking to save a little bit of money when I flew, and so I tried a new service called Upside. And so if you go to upside.com, you can actually book your airfare and hotel, and they will work it out so you get a good deal on your travel. It actually saved me like $600 or $700 on my travel between the hotel and the airline. I did wind up taking a red-eye flight. The flight left at 1 a.m. in Salt Lake City, but I got just a killer deal on all that stuff. And so I'm not staying in the hotel where the conference is, which is usually kind of a nice thing to do. But instead, what wound up happening was I'm in a hotel that's just down the road. So it's about a 15-minute walk. I've got a full suite here. I've got a little kitchen in here and stuff. But anyway, it's been a good deal. And they actually give you gift cards for using their service. So I have like $50 or something in gift cards that I can redeem on Amazon or any other service. I have a referral code, and I will just put it in the show notes because I don't know if reading it off would help anybody, but I'll make sure it makes it into the show notes. And that way, if you sign up for Upside, then I think if you use my referral code, we both get a $50 gift card. So anyway, I'll make sure that that's available. Greg, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah, I've got 2 picks. One, just to reiterate, The Cuckoo's Egg, amazing book. It is old school. As an example, a lot of the book talks about modems and phone banks, so not necessarily technical reference. However, it's a guy who was a programmer, who was a system admin, who found something weird one day and basically started to investigate it. And it's a great manual for how do I think about security? What should I be aware of? And what's the right thing to do? So just a great book. And then, to be honest, I've been telling everybody about the second thing, and I like listening to music while I read, which is weird. I know a lot of people like to just read quietly, but Greta Van Fleet, I love them. It's basically like Led Zeppelin ran into that time portal and got transported into the future and released a new album. They're amazing. So they're on tour. I don't know if this is an appropriate pick, but I've been listening to them nonstop, and I'm evangelizing them to everyone I talk to. So
that sounds awesome. If people want to follow you on Twitter or GitHub, or maybe you have a blog or something somewhere, what are the best places for people to kind of keep track of what you're working on these days?
Yeah, so if you look at Twitter, I'm on G Kushto. I've got a blog through my company, Force 3. So that's force3.com. Force, like a force to be reckoned with, and 3, like the number 3. That's the 3 company founders, which is the name. But those 2 places, the great place to track what I'm doing, where I'm going, where I'm speaking, and love to hear from everybody out there listening. Thoughts and comments, always welcome.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up. Thank you for coming and giving us something to think about on the security front.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah, thanks.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.